For 3 weeks straight, my daughter lay in the oncology ward, taking in each drop of morphine just to keep breathing. Her husband, the one who once vowed, for better or worse, was instead raising the glass at his own birthday party, surrounded by rooftop lights and pounding music. I came unannounced. In my hand wasn't wine or cake, but a small box neatly wrapped in hospital white paper. When he opened it, the entire room froze. Inside was his wife's patient bracelet and a CT scan print showing every metastasis. He stood motionless. The glass slipped from his hand, and not a word left his mouth. I spoke slowly, just loud enough for him to hear, amid the stunned silence. This is a birthday gift from the woman you forgot. If you've ever watched someone you love be betrayed, powerless, while the one who caused the pain kept laughing under the lights, stay until the end of this story. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from a dinner table, right when no one expects it. Leave a dot if you believe silence itself can be a sentence. And subscribe, because every week I'll tell you a true story, where even the kindest souls know how to make the cruel ones bow their heads. For 3 weeks there has been no news from my daughter. 3 weeks without a text, without a FaceTime asking if her father had eaten, or if his left knee still ached when the weather turned cold. Elena had never been silent this long, so this morning I drove nearly 2 hours from Boulder to Denver, carrying a still warm apple pie in the trunk, the same one my late wife used to bake for us each snowy season. I thought my girl would smile, hug me, and say, as always, "Dad, you drove this early again. Come in, I'll make coffee." But life rarely follows the gentle memories we hold. I stood before the door of apartment 3B, the red brick building in Cherry Creek, the one I'd paid over half for, personally oversaw every floorboard replacement, every window and the kitchen lighting, as a final gift after her mother's passing. The silver key was cold in my hand. I turned it. Click. The lock didn't move. I tried again, slower, more carefully. Click. Still stuck. Impossible. I'd used this key for 3 years. I'd let myself in to change bulbs when they were away, and last Christmas Eve, I'd cooked chicken soup there while Elena rested after a long project. I held the key under the hallway light. It was the same one. Elena had made me promise to keep it. "So you can always drop by, Dad. I never want you to feel alone." Yet today it was useless. I knocked. Once, twice, thrice. "Honey, it's Dad. I came to see you." No footsteps, no rustling of clothes behind the door. Only the silence of a tiled hallway, the smell of coffee from across the hall, and daylight cutting through the far glass pane. I rang the bell. The chime echoed inside. The home I'd poured $310,000 of lifelong savings into, along with Elena's own. Her name was on the deed, and so was Graham's, but I never thought the day would come when I'd stand outside a home built with my own hands. I called Elena. The line was dead. I called Graham. One ring, then voicemail. My heart skipped, just as it had 11 years ago when the doctor said, "Martha may not make it through the winter." A voice came from behind. "Looking for someone, sir?" It was Rick, the building manager, clipboard in hand. "My daughter, Elena Porter. The key won't open." He glanced at the lock, then at me. "Oh, right. New lock. Mr. Porter requested a change over 2 weeks ago." I frowned. "Graham requested it?" Rick nodded, uneasy. "Yes, I thought you knew. They said the door was malfunctioning." Why hadn't Elena told me? Why would she change the lock without telling her father, the one who'd spent nearly a year remodeling every corner so she could have peace after her mother died? I forced a smile. "Can you open it for me?" Rick shook his head apologetically. "New policy. Without family approval, I can't." My throat tightened. The day Martha died, Elena had held my shoulder and said, "You'll always have a home with me, Dad." And now I was a stranger outside what used to be my family's door. A voice called from the far end of the hall. "Harrison, that you?" I turned. It was Tom from 3D. The neighbor who always asked me to fix his old cabinet hinges because young guys don't know how the old ones work. He set a trash bag down and said quietly, "Haven't seen Elena in weeks." I steadied my voice. "Me neither." No replies. Tom bit his lip, then added, "But Graham's been around plenty. Different woman every few days. Be specific." My voice was low, trembling. "Tuesday, a blonde. Thursday, a brunette. Yesterday, one in a red dress, laughing in the hall. I thought Elena was on a business trip." My knuckles turned white. That apartment, where Elena once knelt beside me, installing kitchen cabinets, laughing with silicone on her hands, where she once said, "Dad, I'm happy." And now, music drifted through the walls. Glasses clinked, laughter, someone else's. And me? I was outside the very life I'd built for my daughter. At that moment, I understood something cruel. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of sound. It's someone you love choosing to leave you standing in it. Where was Elena? Why the silence? Why had Graham changed the locks and brought others here? The hallway stretched on under dull lights, the smell of old paint hanging in the air. Spring was warming Denver, but my chest felt frozen. I texted, "Honey, I'm outside. I'm worried. Please call me." No reply. For the first time, I realized I no longer had a home to return to, even when it stood right in front of me. I sat down on the upholstered chair at the end of the hallway, right before the POAP, window overlooking the Cherry Creek parking lot. The Denver sky in late spring was clear as glass, sunlight pouring over rows of birch trees just beginning to bud. But inside, everything blurred, like a photograph fogged over by breath. I opened my phone. The screen lit up, reflecting a face older than I remembered. Elena had once made me install a family locator app. I'd grumbled. "I don't like being tracked," she'd laughed. "No one's tracking anyone, Dad. It's just so we can find each other if something happens." I'd shrugged, let her tap and swipe, enter passwords, enable permissions I didn't understand. Then life went on, until this morning. I slid my finger across the icons, found the little circle with a pin. The app opened. The map appeared, a single blue dot trembling where I stood. I zoomed in, zoomed out, my breath fogging the glass. At the top was a tab marked Members. I tapped Elena. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a red dot appeared, fixed northeast of downtown Denver. A line of text blinked below. Last location, Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center, 7.1 miles. Updated 23 minutes ago. Hospital. My fingers went cold even under the sunlight flooding the corridor. I pressed call. No ring. The screen jumped straight to the message. "The number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable." I tried again. Same. "Graham." I dialed his number. It rang once, then voicemail. I hung up, staring at the red dot, as if I could will it to move. It didn't. I shot to my feet and hurried to the elevator. The stainless steel doors closed, reflecting a man in an old brown jacket with fists clenched white. Ground floor. I strode through the revolving doors. The outside air hit my face with the smell of new leaves and faint smoke. A line of taxis waited by the curb. I raised my hand. A yellow sedan stopped. The driver, a woman in her 40s, had the tired eyes of someone coming off a long shift. "St. Luke's," I rasped, "as fast as you can." The car merged into traffic. I reopened the app. The red dot hadn't moved, nailed to the map. 7 miles isn't far, but every red light stretched another year longer. I watched buildings slide past, coffee shops where young people laughed, dog walkers, bicycles, a child hugging a ball bigger than his head. Life outside went on as if nothing were wrong. But in my mind, another film was rolling, a reel I'd sealed away, never wanting to see again. Martha. 3 syllables that still made every nerve flinch. The day the doctor said stage 4 pancreatic cancer. My hand was on her knee, and I saw the veins beneath her skin twitch, like a string pulled too tight. Martha calmed me with that familiar smile, the one that made everyone at the Department of Transportation adore her. "We'll be fine, honey," she said. "We've gone through hail, blizzards, and bridge collapses. We'll get through this, too." We didn't get through it. We went to the end, hand in hand, and I learned to live in a house without the smell of morning coffee. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Family sick?" I nodded. "My daughter. I can't reach her. The app shows a hospital." She nodded back, no more questions. "I'll take 6th Street, fewer lights," she said, with the steady tone of someone who's driven countless people to hospitals and knows which road shortens time when time is measured in heartbeats. The sign for Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center appeared after a turn, green letters on white, behind them a glass tower shimmering with sunlight. The car stopped at the entrance. I paid, but when I tried to tip extra, she shook her head. "Go. They need you more than I do." The automatic doors parted. The smell of disinfectant hit me. The tile floors gleamed, fluorescent lights sharp and sterile. The reception desk stretched like a calm ship in stormy seas. A young woman in blue scrubs looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for my daughter," I said, steadying my voice. "Elena Vale Porter. The locator app shows her last here." "Let me check." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Do you have ID, sir?" I handed over my driver's license. "Are you on the release of information list?" "That's the list of those allowed to get updates." I swallowed. "I'm not sure." She had me sign a lot of forms once. "Please check." She nodded, typed again. Her expression softened. "Yes, you're listed. Harrison Vale, father." I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. "Patient Elena Vale Porter is in the oncology department. You're cleared for basic updates." She pressed a button. "Calling 9th floor nursing station. Family for patient Elena." A nurse arrived minutes later, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied hair and kind professional eyes. "Mr. Vale, I'm Nora from oncology. I'll take you up." The elevator doors opened. We stepped in. Numbers lit one by one. 3, 4, 5. My heart pounded with each ding. "My daughter's condition," I began, then stopped. Nora tilted her head. "The attending doctor will give full details, sir. But your daughter's stable, under control. Tonight, they're adjusting her pain medication." The words pain medication fell into a deep well inside me, echoing nowhere. 9th floor. The doors opened. The air was different, thicker, quieter, reverent, like a chapel where the people whisper. Landscape photos lined the walls, the snow-capped San Juan Mountains, a turquoise lake without a ripple. I followed Nora around a corner. Then I saw it, a whiteboard with green letters. Oncology Wing. I stopped. There was no sound, yet in my head an old symphony began again. The slow drip of a morphine pump, the wheels of a hospital bed rolling over vinyl, the dry texture of Martha's hand as I rubbed lotion into her skin. I even heard my own voice from years ago whispering into her ear, "You just sleep. I'll stay awake." "Are you all right?" Nora asked softly. I nodded, then shook my head, then nodded again. "I'm fine." I wasn't. But I straightened my back, because at the end of that corridor might be Elena. And a father's duty isn't to look graceful, it's simply to show up. We passed the nurse station. Nora jotted a few notes and handed me a white visitor badge marked Family, Authorized. "Wear this. Dr. Carr will meet you in a consultation room before you see your daughter. It's protocol, so family members can prepare." "Dr. Carr?" "Yes, Livia Carr. Elena's oncologist. She'll explain the situation and the treatment plan. You can write any questions here." She gave me a printed sheet with columns labeled Current Diagnosis, Treatment Goals, Medication Side Effects, Post-Discharge Care Plan. My hand rested on that paper as if it were a bridge blueprint, only this time the structure was my daughter's life. At the next corner, a glass door opened automatically. I glimpsed a patient room, a young woman in a knit cap by the window, sunlight falling across a hospital wristband, her husband peeling an apple into thin slices, placing them on a blue tray. Vida quotidiana. Everyday life. Even here, inside oncology, people still found ways to live and to love. Nora stopped before a small door marked Consultation Room B. Please wait here. I'll tell Dr. Carr. The door closed gently. The room was small. 2 chairs, a wooden table, a tissue box, and a painting of a tall grass field. Everything is arranged for people to cry without feeling broken. I set my phone on the table. The app was still open, the red dot motionless inside the pale blue outline of the hospital grounds, like a lighthouse on a map. I touched it, as if warmth could pass through glass. Elena, I whispered inside my mind, Dad's here. A soft knock. The door opened. A woman around 45 entered. White coat crisp. Name badge reading, Dr. Livia Carr, Oncology. Her eyes held the steadiness of someone who had said, "We'll do everything we can" thousands of times, and still meant it every single one. Mr. Vale, she began gently, I'm Dr. Carr. Thank you for coming. Before you see Elna, I need to explain a few things. I nodded, throat tight. I pulled out the chair, sat, hands on my knees, the same posture I used to take before presenting a tough audit report. But this wasn't a bridge or a highway. This was my daughter. And on her doctor's badge, the word oncology felt like a second stamp pressing into my heart. The second emotional collapse didn't come with thunder. It came with a calm red dot on a screen and a whiteboard reading Oncology Wing. I drew in a breath. Please, doctor, I said, tell me everything. Part 3. The white file and the drops of morphine. The consultation room was just big enough for 2 people facing each other. Frosted window light filled the space with a milky gray calm. I could hear every tick of the wall clock. Dr. Livia Carr sat opposite me, her fingers interlaced, voice low, even, and steady, the kind born from years of breaking hard news with compassion. Mr. Vale, I know this will be difficult to hear, but I need to be honest. Your daughter, Elena, has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The tumor has metastasized to the liver, discovered during an emergency check 4 weeks ago. Her words dropped like a stone into still water. I didn't react right away. My head grew heavier, and my pulse thudded in my ears like scattered drum beats. She's enrolled in a clinical trial, the St. Luke's trial, Protocol 214A, a new regimen recently approved by the National Cancer Institute. The goal is to extend average survival by about 18 months, though each case differs. She's responding steadily to the first dose, but still needs morphine to manage the pain. I inhaled deeply, but the air didn't seem enough. 18 months, a year and a half. If the doctor was right, then every minute I sat here was 1 second less of my daughter's remaining time. Why wasn't I told? The question burst out, sharper than I intended. Dr. Carr paused, then opened a thin white file on the table, turned a page, and placed it neatly before me. We tried to reach the listed emergency contact, Mr. Graham Porter, 3 times. No response. Ms. Vale left no alternate contact. She looked at me, until she regained consciousness and said, "If my father calls, let him come." That's when we found your name on the release form. I nodded faintly, my chest tightening. Did she say anything else? She said she didn't want you to know too early. She was afraid you'd fall apart. Dr. Carr's voice softened. She told us, "Dad's already lost Mom. If he finds out I'm here too, he won't stand." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Martha had died of the same disease. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Same location, same progression. Both women I had loved most in this world were consumed by the same darkness. The only difference was that this time I still had time, at least 18 months, not to repeat the mistake of silence. Dr. Carr gently pushed the file toward me. White paper, St. Luke's logo at the top. At the bottom, a fine line read, "Patient enrolled in trial protocol. 214A. Consent form signed April 17th. I read it again and again, as if comprehension could lessen the illness. She stood. "I'll take you to Elena's room. Please be prepared. She's weak and speaks little. but she knows you're here." I nodded, unable to speak. The door opened, light from the corridor spilling in, the familiar scent of antiseptic, waking every memory from 10 years ago, when I had pushed Martha's wheelchair down a similar hallway with the same quiet fear. Room 914. Nora, the nurse from earlier, was adjusting the IV line, a thin tube leading to a clear fluid bag on a steel stand. On the bedside table sat a small, white-labeled box. Morphine sulfate, 10 milligrams per milliliter. I stepped closer. Elna lay on her side, hair tousled, her face pale and fragile as paper. When I whispered "honey," her eyelids flickered. "Dad? Really?" Her voice was raspy, but I knew it instantly. The same tone that used to say, "Dad, I'm home," every time she came to Boulder. I took her hand, cold and thin as a sheet. Around her wrist was a white plastic band printed St. Luke's Trial Protocol, 2A, Participant 0094. I brushed my fingers across the letters as though touching the edge of my own heartbeat. Elena smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have come. I was going to call once I felt better." I shook my head. If I hadn't come, I'd never forgive myself. Her eyes clouded, drifting into morphine haze, but her hand squeezed mine tighter. "Dad, don't worry. I'm just tired. The medicine makes me sleepy." I sat in the metal chair beside her, watching the IV drip. Each drop that fell was a moment extended, both a mercy and a reminder that time was being borrowed. Dr. Carr stood outside the door, signaling Nora to adjust the dosage. I turned and asked softly, "Can I stay tonight?" She nodded. "If you promise not to touch the machines and not to tire the patient, yes." I nodded firmly. "I promise." She left, leaving only me, my daughter, and the steady hum of the infusion pump, the breathing of time itself. I held Elena's hand once more. "Sleep, sweetheart. I'll stay here in Denver until you leave this hospital, however long it takes." She smiled weakly, like a child soothed by a bedtime story. I pulled the blanket up, then sat still, watching the light glint off the morphine bag. The scent of medicine mingled with memory, a mixture of loss, love, and the fragile faith that this time I would not let someone I love fight alone again. Nights in the oncology ward have a light unlike any other, not the warm gold of hotel corridors, nor the sterile white of operating rooms. It's a dim, muted glow, just bright enough for people to see each other, not bright enough to reveal the fear in their eyes. I sat beside Elena's bed, watching the IV drip fall rhythmically, each drop marking the quiet pulse of life still holding on. Dr. Carr entered, checked the monitors, nodded once, and said, "Tonight, we're administering pain relief. You can step out for a while. She'll sleep at least 6 hours." I looked at my daughter, her lips dry, her eyelids heavy, and rose, leaving the room. In the 9th-floor lobby, footsteps echoed from afar. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. The name Mark Greeley, private investigator, was still there, a remnant from my years consulting for Boulder's Public Infrastructure Security Division. Greeley was the man who'd helped me uncover the theft of bridge materials on the Gunnison River project years ago. A pragmatic, quiet man, but precise and relentless. I pressed call. A low, gravelly voice answered after 2 rings. "Old friend Harrison? Been what, 8 years?" "8 years and another tragedy," I said softly. "I need your help." "Same kind of job, technical or personal?" "Personal," I replied, lowering my voice. "My daughter's in the hospital. Do you remember Graham Porter? Her husband, the architect who bragged about contracts at the Denver Fair? That's him. I need to know where he's been the past 3 weeks, how he's spending money, and who he's been with. I suspect he's abandoned Elena." Silence hummed for a moment. Then Greeley spoke, his tone shifting into that familiar gear of a man rebuilding his network. "How deep do you want it? I can run OSINT, open source intel, no warrants needed. That means social media, public invoices, and GPS data, if devices have sharing enabled. Do everything legal. I just want the truth." I heard keystrokes, Mouse clicks and slow, measured breathing. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. Through the corridor window, Denver's city lights stretched below like a giant circuit board. Finally, Greeley said, "Got something?" "Tell me." "I just swept Graham's Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. He's still posting publicly. Latest update, 48 hours ago, taken at Skyline Lounge, Midtown Tower. Caption reads, 'Birthday night with my crew.'" My grip on the phone tightened. "Birthday?" "Yeah, and a fancy one. He's raising a champagne glass with 3 friends, one brunette leaning on his shoulder. While my daughter lay here hooked to morphine, he was toasting himself." Greeley went on, "I also found a deleted post from a Skyline Lounge staff account. It was pulled after 3 hours, but I recovered the cached version. It shows the payment receipt, $3,200, charged to a Porter and Associates LLC card." I blinked. Porter and Associates, the small architecture firm Graham claimed, was struggling so badly he'd sold his car for liquidity. "You're certain it's his company card?" 100%. Bottom line of the receipt reads, "Authorization code 77624, P&A Denver." I leaned back, exhaustion rising like a tide. My entire career had been built on numbers. I trusted only evidence. And this time, the evidence wasn't a bank balance. It was a man's moral deficit. "Greeley, send me everything, photos, cache files, metadata, and if possible, time-stamped GPS." Sent. Check your inbox. I also attached a PDF of the transaction record via Amex Business's Open API. Nothing illegal, just public data. "Good, thanks. You still owe me that whiskey in Boulder." Greeley gave a dry laugh. "This time it's on me. And Harrison, be careful. Dirt like this never comes in one layer." The call ended. A new email appeared. Subject, Porter and Associates, Skyline Lounge, evidence set. I opened it. 3 images. 1, Graham smiling, glass in hand, surrounded by friends who didn't know his wife was in oncology. 2, the check-in tag showing Denver Seago 9:42 p.m. 3, a $3,200 receipt bearing Graham Porter's signature, the same looping curve at the end of the letter R. I saved them all into a secure folder labeled Evidence, Porter, and printed a copy. Before leaving the lobby, I stopped at the nurse's desk. "Is Dr. Carr still in her office?" "Yes, she's preparing treatment files for the morning rounds." "I'd like a word." 3 minutes later, I stood in the small office at the end of the corridor. Dr. Carr looked up from her screen, surprised to see me holding an envelope. "Is something wrong, Mr. Vale?" I set the envelope on her desk, my voice low. "I don't mean to interfere with medical records, but this is something you should keep. Inside are photos and proof that the person listed as emergency contact, Graham Porter, has abandoned the patient. You might need it if this ever reaches the ethics board or insurance review." She opened the envelope and flipped through the photos, her eyes briefly heavy. "I understand. Thank you. This will be noted." I nodded. "I don't want to make a scene. I just want that if one day Elena asks why he never came, the hospital record will tell her the truth, not me." She looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "You realize you're doing what most fathers can't, putting justice into the record instead of into anger." I gave a faint smile. Justice sometimes starts as a PDF file. When I returned to room 914, the lights had dimmed. Only the faint glow of the heart monitor flickered in the dark. I sat by the bed and unlocked my phone. The red dot on the map was still, right here, St. Luke's Medical Center. No more tracking needed. I had found my daughter and lost someone else. Elena slept quietly, her breathing slow and even. I held her hand gently and whispered, "Sleep, sweetheart. As for him, I won't yell, I won't fight. I'll do what I do best, record, preserve evidence, and let justice speak on its own." I thought that was the end, but a few minutes later, Elena stirred, her eyes half open, sleepy and a little embarrassed. "Dad, you're still here?" It's late. I smiled faintly. I told you, I'm staying in Denver until your discharge. She nodded, her voice weak but clear. Graham's probably busy. Yesterday, he said he had a project at Midtown Tower. Do you know that place? His firm's doing the rooftop design. I looked at her, a sharp pain cutting through me. Midtown Tower. Same address, same night, but two different worlds. One raising a glass in music and lights, the other lying here with morphine running through her veins. I didn't speak. I just brushed her hair gently and said, "Yeah, I know the place. Midtown Tower's beautiful. When you're better, I'll drive you past it." Elena smiled, eyes closing again. "He's a good man, Dad. He said he's working extra to cover my hospital bills. I just worry he's overworked." I nodded, swallowing slowly to hide the ache rising inside. "Yeah, maybe he is tired. But don't worry, I'm here now." She didn't answer. Her breathing steadied, her face peaceful in the dim light. I sat there a long time, holding her hand, feeling the weight of a truth that could shatter what little world she still had. But I also knew, sometimes love means knowing when to stay silent. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the IV pump. In my mind, I added another line to the invisible ledger I'd begun. Evidence preserved. Truth deferred. Daughter, let her rest. Denver's night was still, but inside me, an investigation had quietly begun. I stayed beside her until nearly midnight. She slept soundly, her breathing steady beneath the pale light. I was about to stand to make coffee when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Greeley's name. I hesitated, then answered. "You're still awake?" his rough voice asked. "I can't sleep," I said. "I'm watching my daughter sleep, but all I see is that bastard in a bar." Greeley exhaled. "If you want to know, he'll be there again tomorrow night. Skyline Lounge, rooftop. 38th birthday, I just confirmed with the manager. His company rented the top floor. I've got the service access code if you want to go in quietly." I froze. "You're sure?" 100%. 9 p.m. He calls it his Friends Appreciation Night. Might be the last night he still has friends. I heard Greeley's dry chuckle on the line. I glanced at Elena. She shifted slightly, her fingers curled around the blanket's edge. I stroked her hair gently and whispered, "Thank you, Mark. You just gave me a reason to go." "What are you planning?" "No violence, no noise, just a birthday gift." I hung up, stood, and reached for my gray vest. From the leather bag on the chair, I took out the CT scan and the hospital bracelet, the only two things that could speak louder than accusation. Before leaving, I looked back at Elena. The soft light touched her thin face, calm and unaware that the world outside her window was collapsing. I whispered, "Sleep, honey. Tomorrow, I'll deliver this gift exactly where it belongs." Then I stepped into the hallway. The door closed quietly behind me. At the far end, the elevator doors opened, waiting. The Denver night was colder than I'd imagined, and I knew, tomorrow night, under the bar lights and the music, a father's silence would be the one sound that made an entire room bow its head. The Denver night blazed bright. From the 45th floor of Midtown Tower, the wind carried a chill mixed with whiskey and perfume. The Skyline Lounge rooftop was packed, DJs spinning house beats, laser lights slicing across laughing faces. A banner hung by the bar. "Happy 38th, Graham!" I stood at the elevator entrance wearing an old gray suit, the one I'd worn to Elena's graduation. In my hand, a black leather bag held only two things: my daughter's CT scan image and her hospital bracelet labeled St. Luke's Trial Protocol 214A, Participant 0094. I strolled past the tables, heads turned, curious, maybe because I didn't fit this glittering scene. Beneath the glass floor, the city sprawled like a map of light, but I saw only one face. Graham Porter stood in the crowd, laughing loudly, champagne in hand, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, an Omega watch gleaming on his wrist. I stopped just behind him. The DJ shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's raise a glass for Graham Porter. 38 and still on fire. Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, and that's when I stepped forward. No one heard my footsteps through the music, but when I placed my hand on his shoulder, his body stiffened. He turned. Surprise flickered first, then irritation. "What are you doing here?" he muttered. I gave a faint smile, voice cutting through the bass. "Happy birthday, Mr. Porter. I brought you a gift. From your wife." I opened the bag and laid the white hospital bracelet and CT scan on the bar. Neon light reflected off the glossy film, highlighting the dark shadow on the liver, the same one Dr. Carr had shown me. I placed both items among the bottles of Dom Perignon, just being uncorked. For a few seconds the atmosphere shifted. The music still played, but the crowd fell silent, as if a cold draft had swept through. Some guests stared, recognizing the bold letters Elena Porter printed on the bracelet. I looked straight at Graham and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "For the past 3 weeks, you've been here, partying, drinking, surrounded by friends. Meanwhile, your wife has been on the 9th floor of St. Luke's Hospital, hooked to morphine, fighting stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I don't need to list the visits you missed. The hospital records already have them. They called you 3 times. No one answered." Graham's face drained of color. He glanced around, meeting the stares of friends. Surprise, then whispers. A brunette, the same woman from Greeley's photo, stepped back. Graham forced a shaky laugh. You've got it wrong. I cut him off. "No, I've got it right. You were born without understanding the value of silence. So tonight, I'll teach you how loud it can be." I lifted a glass of champagne from the counter, raising it to eye level. "Happy birthday, Graham Porter. This is the only gift you deserve, the truth." I tilted the glass, pouring the liquid slowly over the bar, letting it spread across the CT image and blend into the gray ink. No one laughed. The music stopped. The DJ froze, unsure what was happening. Somewhere a waiter dropped a glass. The sharp crack echoed through the still air. I leaned closer, voice low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "In an hour, something very unpleasant will happen, but not to me." I straightened and met his eyes one last time. "I've given your doctor every record, every image, every proof of your neglect. They're signed, filed, and acknowledged. From now on, everything you say will be recorded, in hospital records, in people's memories, and in justice itself." I turned away, leaving behind the soaked photo, the white bracelet, and a room full of people too stunned to breathe. The elevator doors closed behind me, reflecting my face in cold steel. Inside the room, only the sound of spilled liquor and faint murmurs remained against the hum of the city. Graham Porter's 38th birthday ended not in laughter, but in the sound of breaking glass. And that was the first emotional summit of the story, public humiliation peak. The elevator carried me down from the 45th floor, the rooftop neon blurring as the shaft deepened. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the rooftop music still thudded down, bass braided with the hush of whispers. I didn't look back. Only the night wind brushed my gray vest, and the scent of champagne still clung to my sleeve. Outside, Denver glowed warm. I walked to the parking lot, each step heavy and measured. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from Greeley. "Want an update?" I texted back, "Tell me." Less than a minute later, another message arrived. His Amex card was just blocked. I sent the Skyline photos and receipt to the fraud control team. They flagged excessive personal spend on the company card, so it auto-locked. A cold satisfaction rose in me. Not joy, but the quiet confirmation that things were unfolding exactly as planned. The next message, Bank of Denver issued a fraud alert. I forwarded the spending records, hospitality, and entertainment transactions matching the company's reported losses. They see signs of misappropriation, so accounts are frozen pending review. I breathed in. Greeley worked with surgical precision. Each move lawful, each alert, another tap of the judge's gavel, in a trial without a courtroom. 10 minutes later, a final message came, this time with a photo. Graham at the Skyline bar, face ashen, phone in hand, shouting at the manager, "Who leaked those photos?" It turned out Greeley had reposted the birthday images on a finance forum with a thin caption, "When the boss parties on the company card while the payroll gets cut." No name needed. A Denver IP alone would put insiders on notice. I reread the thread slowly. Card locked. The bank froze the account. Reputation shaken, and he still didn't know who pulled the strings. I looked up at the hospital lights reflected in the glass. Elena still slept. I murmured to myself, sometimes justice doesn't need a court. It only needs the right person to hit send. When the clock read 10:59, my phone rang. The screen showed Graham Porter. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. His voice trembled, frantic. "What did you do to me? The bank froze my corporate account. The FBI's calling. Amex locked the card. What did you send them?" I stared at the cold ceiling light and spoke slowly. "Nothing happened, Graham?" "What do you mean?" "I mean nothing happened. And that's what your wife has felt for 6 weeks. Lying there, calling and getting no answer." No reply came, only ragged breath over the line. I hung up and shut the phone off. The city still sparkled, but for one man the sky had collapsed in an uncertain hour. I went back to the bedside. Elena slept on, fingers lightly clutching the blanket's edge. The infusion light painted her pale face with a weak, peaceful glow. I sat down, took her hand, and whispered, "I have not destroyed anyone's life. I only made them hear the sound of their own silence. It was the only strike that needed no violence, only the truth and a well-timed send." The next morning, Denver lay under a thin veil of mist, streetlights fading as I stepped into the federal building on Wynkoop Street. The corridor stretched wide and white, so silent my footsteps echoed off the stone floor. I wasn't alone. Greeley was already waiting in the lobby, black briefcase in hand, eyes sharp as if he'd anticipated what was coming. "You ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded. The less emotion, the more they'll talk. The conference room on the 7th floor held an oval table beneath halogen lights. A woman in a navy suit, brown hair neatly tied back, stood as we entered. "Renee Caldwell, Assistant U.S. Attorney, District of Colorado," she said, shaking my hand. Her voice was calm and precise, every word deliberate. Beside her stood a younger woman with cropped hair and an FBI badge, Naomi Briggs. Caldwell opened a laptop and turned the screen toward me. A web of financial charts filled it. Transfer lines from Porter and Associates. Denver to Sapphire Consulting Ltd. Grand Cayman, all converging on one bank. Cayman National Bank. "Mr. Vale," she began, voice firm but not cold. "We've been tracking Graham Porter's firm for 2 months. We found offshore transfers through shell companies in the Caymans, each around $240,000 to $250,000, totaling approximately $740,000. I looked at the screen, reading the fine print. Wire transfer. Authorized by G. Porter. Dates: February 14th, March 27th, April 3rd. My pulse slowed. Surprise no longer lived there. Everything aligned with what instinct had whispered all along. His silence was never guilt, only calculation. Naomi slid a thin folder toward me. "You can review this printout. We have FinCEN subpoenas and confirmation from Cayman National Bank, verifying the electronic signature matches Porter's." She paused. "What caught our attention is that the funds were recorded in the company ledger as medical research donations. No legitimate recipients exist." Caldwell looked up, meeting my eyes. "To put it plainly, Mr. Porter used company funds for personal luxury. He expensed private entertainment, faked invoices as consulting and donations, and when the totals exceeded audit thresholds, he funneled the money offshore. In the Caymans, he created a shell company that exists only on paper, moving everything there. Offshore accounts like these rarely face scrutiny, so he thought he was safe." She turned the laptop back, showing the flow diagram. Company account, Sapphire Consulting Ltd., Cayman National Bank. Short version, she said. He played with company money and hid it overseas. Greeley opened his case, sliding a new folder across the table. This fills the gap. 3 Amex statements, skyline photos, and spending confirmations that match the wire transfer dates. He used personal expenses to mask the outgoing funds. Caldwell flipped through, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'll be blunt," she said. "Without Mr. Greeley's evidence, this case might still be labeled under review. But now it won't be." She shut the laptop and signed a pre-filled document. The pen struck paper with a firm click. Search warrant, executed by U.S. District Court, Denver. "The warrant's been approved," she said. "Execution tonight at 8. The FBI will coordinate with the IRS criminal investigation. We only need you to stay put, ready to confirm your statement if required." I stared at the page, a chill running down my spine. Not fear, but the gravity of watching justice move, slow yet precise as a clock's gears. Naomi's tone softened. "I heard your daughter's still at St. Luke's. I'm sorry. When this is over, I'll make sure you hear before it hits the news." I nodded silently. Inside, there was no anger left, only a quiet, measured sadness. I had once built houses, measured every inch of a plan. Now I was watching another kind of structure collapse, the architecture of deceit. Greeley waited in the hallway, hands in his pockets, glancing at his watch. "You think they'll arrest him?" I looked out the glass wall where city towers flickered through the fog. "I don't think," I said. "I know. And tonight, there'll be red and blue lights outside his house." We stepped into the gray morning. A gust of wind flipped a newspaper off a bench. Its headline read, "Federal agencies warn of rising offshore frauds. Denver firms under watch." I stopped, staring at the words, calm as someone who'd already solved the equation long before. "Sometimes," I murmured, "the accounts in the dark don't just hold money. They hold the souls of people who believed they'd never be seen." Tonight, that darkness would turn on the lights. That night, wind from the Rockies swept through the empty streets. Denver, usually noisy, now pulsed only with the red and blue flashes flickering near Midtown, where Porter and Associates stood. I watched from Elena's hospital window. Through the fog glass, those lights looked like stars falling to earth. The raid had begun. My phone buzzed. A message from Greeley. "They're in. FBI plus IRS, CI. Lights everywhere. They've opened the safe." I read it slowly, then glanced at Elena. She lay still, pale, the IV dripping steadily. The only sound was the monitor's faint beeping, the heartbeat of truth itself. Outside, a black federal van stopped before the building. Agents in jackets marked FBI moved in formation. On the 18th floor, the glass facade of Porter and Associates blinked with red reflections as if the building itself were being interrogated. A minute later, the first post hit social media. "Porter, investigation, federal agents raid Denver firm." Graham wasn't there. He was in Centennial, at a friend's mother's house. The video spread so fast that by the time he saw it, his phone was exploding with calls. Partners, clients, employees, all demanding answers. When no one else would listen, he did the last thing he swore he'd never do. He called me. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring, then tapped speaker. His voice cracked between engine noise and panic. "Harrison, please, make them stop. You don't understand. They'll destroy me." I said nothing. Beside me, Elena stirred, eyes half open. "Dad? Who is it?" I set the phone on the table. Voice calm. "Someone learning the last lesson of his life." Graham screamed. "I'm begging you. I'll do anything you want. Just tell them to stop. I can return the money. I cut in, slow and even. "Mr. Porter, do you remember the rooftop night? I told you. The worst thing would happen to you, not me." The room fell silent. Elena watched me, sad but steady. On the line came only the sobs of a man watching his world collapse. I ended the call and set the phone down. Outside the window, flashing lights painted the ceiling. Green, red, white, then faded. I whispered mostly to myself, "Justice sometimes arrives in the glow of sirens. It doesn't need to shout, just show enough proof." Elena squeezed my hand, smiling faintly. "Dad, I used to think justice only lived in courtrooms." I held her hand tighter. "No, sweetheart. Justice begins where people stay silent, until truth decides to speak." Beyond the glass, a helicopter's roar drifted away, scattering light across the high-rise windows. In that city, one man had just lost everything, and one father had reclaimed his daughter's dignity. The next morning, Denver woke to a storm of headlines. On the hospital TV, the morning news flashed across the screen. Graham Porter, architect, owner of Porter and Associates, arrested for tax fraud and embezzlement of his wife's treatment fund. The image showed him in handcuffs, head bowed as he was escorted from the building, red and blue lights washing over his ashen face. Elena, resting against her pillow, froze mid-breath, her eyes widened, lips trembling. "No, that can't be him. Dad, they made a mistake, right?" I said nothing. On the screen, the anchor read slowly, clearly. "The federal court has ordered the defendant to repay $112,000 to victim Elena Porter as restitution for medical expenses and emotional damages." Elena's hands shook. Her eyes filled with tears. She had believed all this time that her husband was working overtime to cover her treatments. Seeing him led away shattered that illusion in an instant. "He really did that to me, didn't he, Dad?" I took her hand, feeling the fragile weight of trust breaking like glass. There was no room left for denial. The hospital door opened. Renee Caldwell stepped in, holding a folder stamped with a red seal. She placed it gently before Elena, her tone calm but steady. "Sign here, Elena. This authorizes the court to release the $112,000 Graham withheld. It's called a restitution order. It means the court is forcing him to return what he took so you can continue treatment." Elena stared at the document, voice cracking. "So all this time, he wasn't helping me at all?" Renee exhaled softly. "No, you believe the wrong person. But justice is doing the right thing now." Elena's hand trembled as she signed. Tears splashed onto the paper. I rested my hand on her shoulder, firm enough for her to feel she wasn't alone. When she finished, Renee stood and said quietly to me, "Justice came late, but it came." I nodded, and it came to the right person. That afternoon, Dr. Livia Carr entered with a folder of new scans, a rare smile on her face. "We just reviewed the CT results. The tumors shrunk by nearly 70%. The trial protocol is working. This time, hope isn't an illusion." Elena looked up at me, tears sliding down her cheeks, but her smile was as soft as sunlight through the window. She didn't need to speak. The look said everything: pain, understanding, and release. I sat beside her, listening to the rhythmic drip of the IV, thinking, sometimes what saves a person isn't money, it's truth. And today, truth finally spoke. Justice had erupted in the night. By morning, only light remained, and a faith quietly restored. 3 weeks after Graham's arrest, the Denver sky looked clearer than ever. Morning sunlight poured through the window of the small apartment I'd rented near St. Luke's Hospital. On the table lay my old leather notebook, the same one I'd carried as a construction supervisor years ago, its corners worn, the first page still marked in black ink. Denver Ledger, work and expense notes. I turned to a blank page and began writing slowly, each line neat and deliberate, like the field reports I used to file. Day 1, the wound discovered. Day 6, the truth uncovered. Day 73, justice activated. Each line was more than memory. It was blood, mine and my daughter's. At the bottom I paused, added one more line, the handwriting unsteady but firm. Not every number belongs in a report. Some stay in the heart. A soft knock sounded at the door. I looked up. Mark Greeley stepped in, coat collar turned up, holding a cup of coffee and a small silver USB drive. "Old man, figured you'd want this," he said, setting it on the table. The label read, Case 200A, Porter and Associates. I picked it up, turning it under the light. "Full backup?" Mark nodded. "Complete. Statements, photo evidence, recordings, investigation files, the warrant. I've stored copies in the cloud, but this one's yours. You earned it." I smiled. There was no hatred left, only completion. I opened the drawer, took one of the unused FBI evidence envelopes from our first report, slid the drive inside, and sealed it. On the front, I wrote, "Evidence, closure copy, H. Benton." Mark looked puzzled. "You're still sending it back? You could keep it as a memento," I said quietly. "I don't need souvenirs. I just need justice to have a complete record. Someday, if anyone asks, they won't find a story. They'll find data." I signed across the seal, handed it to the courier, and watched as it left in the mailbag. A weight lifted from my shoulders. Mark poured the coffee into 2 cups and sat beside me. "You know," he said, "I've done this job for 10 years. Hardly anyone documents things like you. Most just want fast revenge. You record it like you're writing history." I smiled, because to me, justice isn't only an outcome, it's every measured step, like building a bridge. Miss one brick and it collapses. Then people fall back into the same hole. He nodded silently. Outside, sunlight glinted on the envelope just sent away. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, hearing the city ease back into its ordinary rhythm. That afternoon, I placed the Denver Ledger on the shelf beside the other neatly labeled folders. On the spine, I added a small note, "Case closed, for Elena." The last rays of the day slipped through the curtain, lighting the sealed envelope with a quiet shimmer, a wordless confirmation that justice, once properly recorded, never disappears. 9 months later, spring returned to Denver. The maple trees outside the hospital sprouted tender leaves, and sunlight spilled gently across the gray brick courtyard. I sat in the oncology waiting room, holding Elena's newest report, just 4 bold letters I had waited nearly a year to see. NED, no evidence of disease. No trace of cancer left. Dr. Livia Carr entered, her smile bright as the white lights overhead. "Congratulations to both of you," she said, her voice trembling between professionalism and joy. "In medicine, we call this an outlier case, a complete treatment response, almost no malignant cells remaining, a miracle, but a scientifically earned one." I couldn't speak. Only Elena stood and hugged the doctor, eyes wet with gratitude. Behind her, Dr. Carr's voice softened. "Sometimes the thing that keeps a patient alive isn't medicine. It's the person sitting beside them every day." That afternoon, leaving the hospital, I looked up at the clear Denver sky. I knew our personal battle had reached its end, but justice shouldn't stop at a single case. It needed to be shared, so others wouldn't be exploited, deceived, or buried by silence. 2 months later, Renee Caldwell called to say the FBI and the Colorado Financial Integrity Office wanted to host a community seminar. Together we named it Financial Fraud and Elder Justice, when justice can begin with a cup of coffee. The event took place in the Grand Hall of Denver Law School. I stood at the podium, light washing over a face carved by years, looking out at hundreds of people, office workers, students, and older victims of financial abuse. Renee introduced me briefly, then stepped aside. I took a breath and spoke slowly, each word steady. "I'm not a lawyer, not a judge. I'm just a father who once watched justice smothered by silence. And I've learned one thing. Justice doesn't need to win big. It just needs to be heard. When you speak up, even with a single letter, an email, or a look that refuses to hide, that alone is a kind of victory." The hall fell silent. A woman in the front row gripped her husband's hand, nodding, tears on her cheeks. I saw myself 8 months ago, a desperate father in a hospital bed. At the end, as Renee walked me to the door, she said softly, "Mr. Harrison, today you planted another seed. Maybe years from now, it'll save someone like your daughter." I smiled, looking up at the lit facade of the building. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Dr. Carr says I'm officially Ned. I want you to know I'm not just surviving. I'm going to live with purpose." I stopped the car and stared at that line for a long time. In the distance, the city lights shimmered through the windshield, tiny dots of hope reflected in glass. 18 months after the night of the raid, the case of Graham Porter officially came to an end. The federal court sentenced him to 4 years in prison for financial fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement of medical funds. The court also confirms the preliminary restitution previously issued and finalizes the repayment order in this verdict. The judgment was read in a cold room where no one applauded. Only the steady click of the recorder echoed like a gavel. Beck striking. Elena attended that hearing. She sat upright, head high, not the frail woman who once lay helpless in a hospital bed. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she spoke only one calm, steady sentence. "I withdraw my bail request, and I file for divorce." The courtroom fell utterly silent. No one said another word. I watched my daughter walk out into the hallway, sunlight falling across her shoulders, glinting through her hair, a quiet sign of a new beginning. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. One called out, "Mr. Harrison, do you think justice has been served today?" I answered, "Justice isn't measured by a sentence. It's measured by whether the victim can lift their head and keep living." And my daughter just did. That afternoon, Elena and I returned home. She rehung an old photo taken at City Park, the one where she ran laughing as a child, while I sat nearby writing in my ledger. Now she smiled again, her gaze steady, her hands no longer trembling. I closed the Denver ledger and placed it back in the drawer beside the sealed envelope addressed to the FBI. On the cover, I added one last line. "Justice may come late, but when it arrives, it needs no apology." Elena stepped closer and whispered, "Dad, I don't hate him anymore." I smiled. "Then you've already won." Outside the window, the Denver skyline glowed under a soft golden sunset. I knew our battle had finally ended, not with shouting, but with a rightful verdict and a heart restored. If you've ever been betrayed, hurt by someone you trusted, but still chose to stand up in silence, leave a single dot in the comments. So I know you too believe that justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs truth. And if you believe dignity is the one thing that never loses its worth, subscribe, because every week I'll share another story where the silent are finally heard.